Cool. Yeah, no.
I'm Noam. I'll be the first and third speaker for op.
And I'm Amar. I'll be the second speaker for op.
Okay, thank you guys. I hope we have a nice debate. My time is going to begin in three, two, one. This is going to be a really simple speech. It's going to go top of case, some definitions, a couple characterizations, and then contentions. First, we think this house is a rational actor, framework, net benefits, very simple. One observation, how do gangs work? Oftentimes, in these high crime areas, you have rival gangs. Being a part of not one gang and not another gang isn't always an option for young people because then you get mugged, you get robbed, you could have sexual violence done against you. People can't be actively blamed for joining these gangs. Oftentimes, their brothers are part of the gangs. Maybe even their fathers are part of the gangs. So we can't blame them, the people who are joining, for actively joining the gang. From where we are, it's easy to point out that they are morally suspect, the ones who are dealing the drugs, the ones who are committing violent acts. But the truth is that oftentimes it's actually self-defense because not joining is not actually a real option. With that, why does that matter? The people at the lower echelons are the ones forced to do the crimes that Op argues we should perpetrate. The drug crimes, the violent crimes. They aren't asked to do them, they are told. They are told, you are a part of this gang, we give you protection, you need to go mug that lady. You need to go sell these drugs. Again, we can't expect them to say no because if they do, they're often shot or turned away, and then they're an enemy of both rival gangs. So they're doing this because they want to protect themselves. Fifth, yeah, these are people actually doing the crimes, and understand that they are the ones being put behind bars, not the ones that are telling them to actually do the crimes. This is what you saw with Al Capone. He was never actually convicted of violent crimes. Another quick piece of framing, why is it that Al Capone cases will implicate the higher ups? We tell you generally in order for a gang to function, the higher ups have number one, more resources, so they can buy and operate money, launder businesses, and they number two, need more resources to hire gang members. So they have more of an incentive to commit financial crimes. And number three, they don't want to be caught. And in the status quo, it is harder to be convicted for Al Capone crimes because we aren't focused on them. Understand that the status quo is the opposition side, and you have the higher ups of a gang never being convicted because they aren't the ones themselves doing the violent crimes. And in our legal system, we don't have a like, he told me to do it system. It's whoever did it. Our first contention is on the impact of prosecuting on Gov or Op. First sub-contention on no solvency on Op. We think the comparative, trying violent and drug crimes, is going to be unsuccessful. Two reasons. First, the difficulty of actual convictions. Keep that in mind. That's our second contention. And number two, much more importantly, we think it doesn't solve the root issue. Because every person being put in jail is normally younger people. Why? Because as I tell you top of case, it's going to be the ones that just got recruited, or the ones oftentimes doing these lower level crimes, and we think the ones who just got recruited are generally younger. And so they're being put into jail, and when they come out, they have the mentality of fuck the police. But much more importantly, they are incredibly replaceable because obviously taking out Al Capone is what stopped his gang, not all the small arrests. We think, in fact, Al Capone doesn't care at all if you are arresting the smaller gang members because he understands that there's a bunch of others who will take their place. That's the issue. Because in fact, all of these arrests of younger people cultivate a mentality that it is conducive to more people joining gangs because of the fuck the police mentality. Because in these high crime areas, you see the police as the one who like just took your brother away, and so then you join a gang. Yeah, it's to lash out, easier to cultivate resentment, and to get people to join organized crime. The second sub-contention here is on more gang members and more violent crime. We tell you there are more gang members and more violent crime in op world. Why? When you convict the grunts of a gang, the people who carry out the dirty work, and the gang has fewer resources, that gives the gang an incentive to look for more members. So we're polling the community more, recruiting more people and younger people. This means as you arrest more people are then involved in violent crime, and more crime is committed, more criminals exist. We don't think that it's the case that when you prosecute one person, you have the effect that is intended, which is, oh no, my brother just got arrested. I don't want to get arrested, so now I'm not going to go into crime. No, oftentimes you have people joining because they want to avenge their siblings, or as we told you, because they don't really have another choice. Our third sub-contention is on cutting the tree. We tell you Gov's side cuts out systemic violence, and that we solve much more so for drug dealing and violent crime. Neither side can claim that they have full solvency. We just think we have more. Because when you take resources from the people at the top of the gangs, people who conduct legions of smaller gang members, two things happen. Number one, those gang members receive fewer attacks, and number two, those people no longer hire more gang members. This is a very simple idea. It's just that in the bureaucracy of gangs, if you take someone out who is higher up, it's going to have a larger impact because two reasons. One, they actually know how to manage their like I don't know, mini gang, but also more importantly, they aren't as replaceable. People don't have as much experience, and even for the time being that they are convicted and someone is trying to take their place, that's a month where you have less violence. That means that at the point where you convict people with more resources, who are hiring the young populace, the younger among us are no longer convicted. That means more people live their lives. They aren't taking from their homes at a young age to eventually get convicted. You cut out the systemic violence. For those reasons, that's very good. Contention two is on the difficulty of prosecution on the opposition side. The idea here is much simpler. It is more difficult to prosecute violent and drug-related crimes than it is to people who commit financial crimes. Why? Because in order to prosecute someone for committing a violent crime, you need objective evidence. This is the same in both worlds, but understand that a witness who said, yeah, I saw this, oftentimes isn't enough because you can say that the evidence just like isn't conclusive. You need a recording of the crime being committed. You need tens of witnesses or DNA evidence. Importantly, all of these things can be circumvented if proper precautions are taken. On the contrary, if I commit tax fraud and there's a reason to believe that I'm underreporting my income, that reason probably takes the form of payment stubs and things I omitted from my income reports.
Yo,
Or
T,
when I fraud, yeah, sorry.
could you repeat the tagline of contention two, please?
Yeah. It's on the difficulty of prosecution on the opposition side.
Okay, thank you.
I'll restart in three, two. Yeah, and when I commit fraud, people can uncover the fact that I'm committing fraud by conducting an internal audit. What does this mean? In the simplest terms possible, you don't need to deal with human subjectivity, witnesses and their possible inaccuracies, false reporting, lack of evidence, ambiguous information. But also, more importantly, just understand the analysis that you're actually taking out people who are higher up because it's higher up people who are actually engaging in this crime. Comparatively, I just want you to make it very clear that opposition side never prosecutes those who are higher up because those who are higher up aren't actually committing the crime. They're telling people to commit the crime. They don't actually get yeah, committed. Okay. Quick, like not contention, but call it mini contention on perception, which we think is going to be one of the most important impacts in this round. We think that perceptually the justice system is doing a better job in government world. Why? Two reasons. The people who are actually being convicted are seen as worse members of the community because they are the ones who are seen as being like endemic to the gangs that have, I don't know, riddled the area with crime for say 20 years, 25 years. But when you take like some kid who's barely 15 years old and you arrest him because he was, I don't know, selling some drugs to someone because he needs to, then you're going to have mothers, you're going to have brothers who come out and say, why is the justice system doing this? They aren't actually cutting out crime. We think that once you understand that there's very little long-term solvency, it's just like, why are you arresting people who aren't the cause of the issue? And so even if they prove that we don't have actual like change, we think perceptual change is also a huge impact within this round. For all these reasons, so proud to propose. Theo's gonna go to the bathroom really quickly, so if you guys, that's okay.
So you'd like us to just like wait?
Yeah, she'll be back in 10 seconds.
All right, sure.
Theo's back.
Okay, great. So, I have 8 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock. I want to say before I start, I'm feeling like a little sick, so if I stop to like cough or I have shortness of breath, please do bear with me. Okay, with that being said, is anybody not ready? Great. Okay, so hello, Judge. My name is Noam Gross, first and third speaker for the opposition case. My time is going to start now. So we're going to define this house as a rational actor and framework as net benefits to the high crime areas. We essentially agree with our opponents here. Okay. So we also want to mention that we are the status quo. This is agreed by both sides because, we're saying that we shouldn't, essentially prioritize one conviction over the other. Okay, on to our first contention about increase in violence as a result of reprioritization. So in any legal system, the deterrent for committing crimes, whatever type they are, is the law and the punishment that comes from breaking the law. If prosecutors focus on convicting financial crimes over violent ones, this sends the message that there is a lesser deterrent for violent crimes. Why is this bad? Well, violent crimes such as gun violence or mass drug use within a population are objectively worse for the general public than financial crimes are. Fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion are things that impact people living in high crime areas, the people we are trying to protect and assist, much less than, say, robbery or assault or murder. For this reason, it fits a prosecutor's moral imperative to protect the people from the worst crimes, to attack the crimes which most negatively impact the quality of life of the people in these areas. So to sum up, on opposition side, we actually target the crimes that have the greatest negative impact on the people, fulfilling our net benefits framework. On to our second contention. Al Capone cases aren't as common in the modern world. So many people have seen movies about the mafia. But judges, how many times have you recently read a news article about a mafia-like organization running the streets in high crime areas? The answer is probably not many, and we believe that this basic observation of modern reality makes it hard for Gov to say that these cases are the biggest problems in high crime areas. I invite Gov to come up with a couple examples of deeply hierarchical, centralized criminal networks in high crime areas that run the streets in the modern day. It's just hard to see how this is a big issue.
Yeah, why?
I'll take it if I have time. Uh, and compared to cases of drug use and gun violence, which we actually do see many news articles about, this is a clear win on magnitude and on scope and on probability for the op side. So, Judge, look to look at a comparative, the op world targets clear problems that affect high crime communities, while things like money laundering often exist as, transnational transactions and happen between decentralized criminal groups over states and countries rather than in singular high crime communities. Once again, it's not hard to believe this because of the lack of real world examples. All in all, GovWorld loses on GovWorld loses on the amount of, sorry, Offworld wins on the amount of people we can actually help, which is a huge ballot in this debate, as the number of people or communities we can help isn't an agreed upon priority by both sides. On to our third contention about communities losing faith in the justice system. So when people living in high crime communities see less deterrence against violent crimes and more towards financial crimes, they begin to lose faith in the justice system as a means to protect them. As mentioned in our first contention, people living in high crime areas almost certainly care more about limiting violent crimes than Al Capone crimes. For that reason, when they see violent crimes being punished less and their communities having a subsequent increase in violent crimes and drug destitution, they will objectively lose faith in the justice system. What are the impacts of this? Well, the entire justice system is going to falter because witnesses will be less likely to assist police in investigations because they'll believe that the police care more about limiting financial crimes and protecting, overall revenue rather than protecting the citizens themselves.
Yeah, why?
Again, if I have time, I'll take it at the end. Additionally, citizens will be less likely to be witnesses against violent criminals because they will believe that the system will be unable to protect them, leading to far less convictions. This impact, when coupled with contention one, gives us two ways of how violent crimes will overall increase in society in the Gov world. Now let's go on to rebutting the Gov case. So onto their first actually no, onto their definitions. Just as a characterization response, modern gangs in America really do not commit financial crimes in nearly similar numbers to violent crimes. Additionally, targeting the higher ups in gangs is not actually going to reduce violent crimes in 2026 because even if, say, we behead the head of the snake of a gang, another person will eventually fill its place. Additionally, gangs will naturally allocate lower level criminals to doing violent crimes, meaning that even if we were to get rid of the leader of a gang, people will still be committing violent crimes. Now, on to the first contention about the impact of prosecution on Gov versus Op. We want to say that in Op world, we dissuade people from doing violent crime because in Gov world, they essentially prosecute violent crimes to a lesser degree, meaning that based on basic logic, it simply just makes more sense that violent crimes will increase if criminals notice punishment against these crimes is lesser.
Yeah, why?
Again, if I have time, I'll take it at the end. There's a lot to get through. Okay, additionally, it doesn't make sense that more people will join gangs because of the fuck the police mentality. Because people joining gangs are the ones that are going to carry out the grunt work. They know they're going to have to do the low level crimes. And if they know that the punishment on these crimes is worse, then they're going to be less likely to want to commit these crimes and join the gangs. Even if they are spiteful towards the system, it simply makes more sense that they won't want to join gangs and commit violent crimes if the deterrence against the crimes is higher. Again, this is how our entire legal system works. Now, on the idea of cutting the tree, the root issues of gangs are not necessarily the leaders, but the culture which allows for violent crimes to plague high crime areas and neighborhoods.
Yeah,
The
why?
warranting, again, if I have time, the warranting on the idea for leaders of the gangs necessarily being, sorry, the warranting on the idea of, the root cause of gang violence and the problems that they cause for society, being the leaders of the gangs, is just not properly warranted out by my opponents. Now, on to the second contention on the difficulty of prosecution on the op side. In both cases, you're going to need objective evidence. And it is, in fact, much, much harder to arrest people who are higher up. And this entire contention actually flows to opposition side. Judges, just think about the logic here. People who are higher up can hire their own lawyers. They can frame other people. They usually have legal safeguards to protect themselves, and much, much more. Historically, it isn't true that a drug dealing case takes as long as, say, arresting Al Capone, right? And the point that Gov makes about prosecution being so much harder just is not true. While prosecutors will try to arrest people with armies of lawyers and paperwork to defend them, the people actively hurting innocent people in these communities will run free. Additionally, because of our third contention, it's going to be much harder to prosecute violent crimes in the Gov world. Um, okay, I will take one POI, but please tell me what topic it was on.
Yeah, okay. So would you say that in the status quo, we're doing a good job at dealing with gang violence?
I would say in the status quo, we're doing a better job in dealing with gang violence than if we were to go with the Gov world. Um, okay. Uh, I will essentially see the rest of my time. Oh, actually, no, I won't. On this idea of perception. So they say that the justice system is better in the gov world, and they say that people being convicted are seen as worse members of the community. So our contention three essentially defeats government's point here on perception. Families will keep experiencing violent crimes committed against them, and they will ask their government for help to no avail, which is again going to feed into the idea that people will lose faith in the justice system, which is going to feed into the idea that there'll be less prosecutions for violent crimes, meaning that violent crimes will be more common throughout society, and overall, there's going to be a lot of negative impacts for the people actually living in high crime areas. And for all these reasons, I strongly, strongly urge an opposition ballot. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah. Quick top of case. I have sorry, quick framework. God, quick roadmap. I have top of case. I have my opponent's case, and then I have our case. Three, two, one. Hello, judges. Hello, opponents. First thing that I need to get out of the way is the fact that the status quo isn't good. This is an off point, but the status quo is essentially a disaster. Evidently, my opponent's side is dysfunctional. They're advocating for the status quo. In the status quo, we see ridiculous amounts of violent crime. Second thing I want to talk about is our framing from my teammate's first speech. This idea of how exactly it is that gangs work. Oftentimes in these high crime areas, you have rival gangs. Being a part of no gang isn't really an option because then you get mugged, then you get robbed. You can have sexual violence done against you. People can't be actively blaming gangs for the individuals who join gangs for the crimes committed by the higher ups in gangs. From where we are, it's easy to point out that they are morally suspect, but the truth is that it's essentially self-defense. With that, why does that matter? They are often the people at the lower echelons, forced to do jobs they aren't asked, they are told. They're told you're a part of this gang, go mug that lady, go sell these drugs. Again, we cannot expect them to say no. If they do, they're often shot or turned away into an enemy of both the gang and the police. And so the people doing these crimes are not genuinely the issue. Understand it's the people who are the upper echelons, the people committing financial crimes who are the problem. This piece of framing doesn't get a response. It comes straight out of PMC. It flows through. Why does that matter? Because if you buy that it is not the cronies who are the reason we have so much violent crime in this world, then you also must buy by proxy the idea that there is less violent crime on Gov's side. There's less violent crime if you buy this dropped warrant. There's less violent crime if you cut out the systemic issues. Quickly on my opponent's case. Their first contention is on this idea that there's an increase in violence. I think I made very clear why this just isn't the case. They also then say violent crimes are objectively worse for the general public. Two reasons this isn't true. Financial crimes create systemic inequality, which seriously impacts quality of life. But also, there's less violent crime when you cut the tree. I'll explain why they don't properly respond to this in just a second. My opponents think that people think better of law enforcement when violent crimes are arrested. I'll explain this in just a second. Understand how the panopticon system works, which is that people still see some people get 20 years in jail. So the fact that there aren't 100 people who have been sent to jail doesn't mean people will go around killing willy-nilly. The idea I'm responding to right now is this idea that you'll see an increase in violence when fewer people are arrested. But also understand that right now there is a huge amount of crime. There's no reason to see that the demand for more crime will increase and thus the supply will. Just think about this. The law isn't changing. You still get life in jail if you kill somebody. This is still a deterrent in both worlds. Believing you won't be caught exists in both worlds, or else there would be no crime on op side. Okay. Now on this idea of perception and people thinking better of law enforcement. Why isn't this true? My opponents believe that when you arrest violent criminals, people think better of law enforcement. Two reasons this is false. Generally, the people who are at the top of a gang hierarchy are older. They look more hardened. Maybe they have more tattoos. They look like genuine criminals. They don't look like they're still in high school. So when the public sees gang leader indicted for a litany of financial crimes, and they see an attached picture of a sleazy old man covered in tattoos of weapons with calluses, they think, wow, the police are actually doing something. They're taking down the big guys. That betters public perception of crime, of criminal behavior, which actually means this turns to us. Obviously, if you take down the big guys, the public thinks better of, the police in general. Now, why don't people feel you're effective on our side? Well, the warranting here is simple, because when you arrest younger people who make up the majority of a gang, that doesn't make a big splash. Saying 100 times over, we arrested this kid, loses its impact very quickly. The public thinks, oh, well, this happens all the time. But more importantly, if people don't see actual change, which is what happens in our world, they aren't convinced that prosecutors are actually being efficient. They don't think anything of the people who are indicted. Okay. They then say that Al Capone cases aren't as common. You don't hear about them. They really don't exist in the status quo. Judges, my opponents are so right. We don't hear about the mafia and the status quo. We don't hear about organized crime because organized criminals don't get convicted. So nobody hears about their existence. Look at criminal gangs and the mafia, which exists in New York City. The Crips, the Bloods, these are all organizations. But more importantly, here is a warrant. In order to maintain a group like a gang, you need economic resources. You need a higher up, similar to Al Capone. There is no way to compel people to commit violent crimes on your behalf if you don't have the money necessary to compel them to commit violent crimes. Do you think gang wars exist because people just want to kill one another? No, they do it for financial reasons. Okay, let's go to our case. My opponents give you a couple of short-sighted responses. They say that on our first contention that you probably don't see as many issues, in large part, number one, because of their first contention, which is just that you don't have as many people who are at the upper echelons, but more critically, they say that you don't actually cut the tree. This is objectively untrue. You probably do cut the tree. That's for a very simple reason. Because as I tell you in response to their second contention, you need a person to organize crime. If nobody has financial resources, if nobody has money, how do you get the young people who are a part of your gang to kill people? How do you get them to sell drugs? Where do the drugs even come from? Just obviously, you need to cut the tree, and obviously, there also is a tree. Okay. They then say, critically, that if you don't see as many arrests, you're more likely to commit violent crime. Two reasons this is false. Number one, if your gang leader is arrested, that is an incredible deterrent. You think he's the best of the best. How could he have gotten caught? But also, seeing any arrests at all, and inevitably you will see some, still scares you. It isn't about the volume of arrests. People have trouble conceptualizing the difference between 10,000 and 15,000, or even 100 and 500. What that means is that no matter how many more convictions happen, you're more than likely still going to see criminals who are scared of getting caught. We don't think that the numbers make significant differences. In the same way that people don't know what the difference between 1 million and a billion is, people won't be able to conceptualize the difference between 10,000 and 15,000. Okay. A very important response. I understand that this doesn't get refuted just yet, and it's also probably something that needs to be talked about quite a bit. They say in response to our second contention that violent crimes do not increase, and that is because you don't actually successfully indict the people who are at the top of these organizations. Why isn't this true? Because in our world, what is our advocacy actually? Our advocacy is for a world in which you pool resources otherwise spent on violent crimes and you reallocate them to missions that indict the criminals at the upper echelons of gangs. When you have 100 cases, all of whom are trying to indict specific people, and you take all of the resources from those cases and dedicate them to one case, invariably, you're going to capture the criminals who are at the top of gangs. Why? Because when you have more resources, you can indict even the stickiest criminals, even the ones who are most capable of getting out of your grips. Okay. Anyway, they very quickly say that like perception doesn't get all that much better. They say this increased in violence point again. Once again, who is committing crimes? We think probably the youngest people in society. What does that mean? People see young people getting arrested and think, wow, how is it possible that somebody who's in high school is committing violent crimes? And they see that happen hundreds of times, and they never see it change. You never see any change in the frequency of violent crimes. They don't really see on news this guy who killed 50 people was arrested and think, wow, that's incredible. Because they know another guy will come up and kill 50 more people in the next month. What that means is probably that you have to actually indict the people who are at the tops of gangs if you want to see any progress. You need to indict the person who is coordinating the crimes, who has all of the money, who has all of the resources, who is telling the younger people you need to commit crimes. And at the point at which you do that, number one, very importantly, there's less violent crimes, the public thinks better of you. But number two, and also very importantly, it feels like you actually arrested somebody who's important. There is still a lot of economic crime in the world today. Thank you, judges, for your times. I strongly urge a government ballot because we're the side who has pragmatically assessed what it means to actually minimize violent crime and what it means to better the socioeconomic standings of the people who exist within our society.
Okay. My name's Amar. I'm the second speaker for the opposition side. I'm just getting my timer set up. Okay. And wait, my time starts now. Okay, judges, before I get into their case and do like a line by line rebuttal or do some defense on what they said about our case, I first want to do an overview on what really matters in this round. Okay? There's one thing that government side keeps bringing up in this debate and acts like it's the most important thing ever, this concept of the tree, the snake, right? If you cut off the head of the snake, then everything becomes better magically, right? If you cut off the head of the snake, then people are disorganized and there won't be as much crime because there's no one to organize them, right? That's what Gov keeps bringing up. But with this quick overview, I'm going to explain how this is completely untrue and how the main foundation for their case falls apart when we really think about what it means to cut off the head of the snake, right? So in the modern day, first of all, this definitely isn't true. Once again, criminal masterminds with insane amounts of money, even if they're arrested for financial crimes, will not serve as much time as if we could catch them and their henchmen for murder. If we can connect murder and real felonies back to them, they will actually serve time in a maximum security prison rather than some luxury prison where they're going to be able to call people and where they can still organize crime.
You know why?
No, thank you. I'll take them at the end. Government doesn't really interact with this because they know that it's true. Luxury prisons do exist. There's all kinds of like ways to communicate with people from prison, and Gov just doesn't interact with that entirely. So they need to understand that this is a big truth, especially in the modern day, which exists. That,
POC?
yeah, sure.
Sorry. This is a weird question. Was this said in first speech of like luxury prisons?
No, but this is a constructive
Okay,
speech. I
okay.
can bring new
Okay.
arguments.
No, yeah. Sorry. It just because like I was wondering if I misheard. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk about, like, I'm still in this overview, but now another thing I want to bring up is power vacuums, right? Now, if we look at things like if we look at communities that are historically or like that have mostly been very controlled by gangs, like for example, like O Block in Chicago, you can see that there have been transfer of leadership within these organized criminal networks, right? We can see that leaders have been arrested, leaders have been killed or something, and people come to take their place, just like people come to take the henchman's place. And of course, government side doesn't interact with this either because this is a truth, and they just don't really talk about it, right? But I'm here to talk about it now. So this power vacuum, what happens when leaders are killed or arrested is there's still like drugs being made, right? And there's still money to be made illegally. And there's no chance that nobody in these high crime communities or high crime areas don't recognize this, right? So of course, someone's going to try to step up to the occasion and try to take control of these criminal networks. And this is something that Gov doesn't talk about because once again, this is just something they're ignoring, which is still true. That power vacuums do exist and that people do try to step in to try and fill the shoes of
You know
somebody
why?
who was arrested or killed. No, thank you. I'll take them at the end if I can. So now that we've understood that power vacuums and luxury prisons exist, and that people can still run organizations from prison, or that someone will come to take their place, we should understand this heading into my rebuttals to their main case, right? So I think okay, yeah, talking about their main case here, yeah, we can see that government talks a lot about like their contention is about the impact of prosecution on the government versus opposition side. They're saying that there's going to be more violence and more violent crime in the opposition world, but I think like we did a pretty good job of refuting that when we said that it's going like just based on basic logic, it makes more sense that violent crimes will increase if criminals notice that punishment against these crimes is lessened, right? Punishment, and I mean these crimes as in the violent crimes like drug abuse or murders, right? It doesn't make sense that there's going to be like the impact on prosecution is going to be greater, that we're going to have more prosecution if we're not prosecuting people that are actually committing the crimes and hurting families, right? And this also ties into perception as well, right? They say a lot about perception, and we also say that our contention 3 kind of talks about this. And to respond to that, they say that, it feels like you arrested someone who's important. Let's take the old dude with a bunch of tattoos. Oh, yeah, that's going to make people feel better. But no, that's not true. If I'm a young person that's, dealing out drugs and, murdering people because somebody else is telling me to, and then I murder a bunch of people and then I get
You know
arrested,
why?
the families of the people that I murdered will actually feel better and knowing that I have been arrested for my crimes, right? No, thank you. I'll have to take that at the end. I still have a lot to get through. As mentioned in our contention 1, people living in high crime areas almost certainly care about limiting violent crimes than Al Capone crimes because they are feeling the immediate effects of drug use and murdering, right? And that's just something that's not properly responded to. That's something that most people would care about in these high crime communities, and so on and so forth. So now to get into what they said about our case, right? When they rebutted to our main case in some top of speech stuff, saying that there's less violent crime when you cut off the head of the snake. They kind of repeated their first speech a lot here, but just because violent crime exists in the status quo doesn't mean that violent crime will exist in a lesser number in their world, right? This is just a full assumption that my opponents make, which isn't warranted out enough, and it's repeating the first speech a lot. But these people are doing like these crimes, and that's the issue, right? They are independent individuals which can choose whether or not to commit crimes. Yes, to some degree they might be forced, but the root cause of gang violence is probably not the culture in high crime areas of having to join a gang, and it's not one specific gang leader as well, right? People are still actively making choices,
You know
and
why?
their agency isn't limited to the extent that people that they're saying here. No, I'm sorry, I'll have to take these at the end. Moving on to like some more specific rebuttals, right? They said that less violent crime when you cut the tree will ultimately help the community. Once again, judges, if we were to ask someone in a high crime area, do you care more about limiting muggings, murders, and assaults? Most likely they've had a friend or family member that has been affected by these crimes. Or do you care more about limiting financial crimes, which are going to be very hard to prosecute? It might even take years, right? So I think we know what the answer to that question is if you ask somebody living in that high crime area. And I do, and I mean, even if these do feed into systemic issues, I think realistically, every single person in this high crime area would rather have a limitation on violent crimes than financial ones. If we went around and asked people, they would be more willing to stop the crimes that are happening now, right? This time frame is a big issue here, and they don't talk about how prosecuting people for financial crimes after an army of lawyers, after an army of paperwork, is going to take years and years, whereas arresting somebody for, drugs or for murdering is going to take a lot less time and is going to actually help people like a lot more, right? On to like what they said about our contention too. They said that arresting 100 henchmen doesn't do much, and the public thinks that this doesn't happen all the time, and that we don't hear about the mafia and the status quo because they aren't convicted. They say like, oh, we have these We do have gangs in the modern world, but they aren't convicted, and we don't know about the leaders because we don't have enough emphasis on that. But judges, when people see a murderer or a serial like assaulter getting arrested, they see that the police actually care about protecting the people. Public perception is probably going to be better if we see 100 violent criminals getting arrested than just one financial criminal gang leader that doesn't even guarantee that there's going to be less crime. Government keeps making this out to be like, oh, if you arrest the head of the snake, then everybody else is going to stop committing crime. We've already said how this isn't true, right? Like we've said, I mean, I just said that, people can take their place, but we've also said that this, like in the modern world, there are going to be people just coming in to fill in those shoes, and communities will still lose faith in the justice system either way. It's too simplistic on the government side to say that it's not important to say arresting a murderer or a brutal gang member isn't actually important, but it's incredibly important that the public sees violent criminals getting published en masse, right?
So
I
I
think that it's incredibly short-sighted of them. No, sorry, at the end to say those kinds of things. So all in all, to clarify and simplify the round, because I've said a lot of things and the other side have said a lot of things. I'm gonna check how much time I have left. Oh, I have like 15 seconds left. But anyways, judges, you should really vote for the opposition side on this debate because of all the things we've said and the fact that, government side isn't making like clear claims and they don't like talk about how power vacuums still exist. So anyways, thank you so much, and I hope you cast a vote for the opposition side in this debate. Thank you.
Okay. Great. So I have 4 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock. Let me just start my timer. Okay. Is anyone not ready? No. Okay, great. So again, hello, Judge. My name is Noam Gross. I am the first and now the third speaker for the opposition side, and my time is going to start now. So I think we should just start by summarizing the main clashes in this debate. The first one is which side is going to lead to an overall reduction in violent crime. The answer here is clearly opposition. We have mentioned in our first contention why deterrence for crime through the justice system is the main thing which gets people to stop committing crimes. This is simply intuitive, right? Okay, now which side prioritizes the needs of people living in high crime areas? Again, the answer here is clearly the opposition. Gov tries to tell us that the average person living in a high crime area probably cares more about laundering, tax evasion, and fraud than they care about muggings, rapes, assaults, and murders. Judges, do not let them get away with this. It's simply intuitive that people in high crime areas want to limit crimes that directly victimize them rather than, say, financial systems. Again, people would obviously just want to limit stuff which attacks them personally, right? This is simply intuitive as well. Okay, on to weighing. A massive point we have here is that they simply do not respond to our third contention about people losing faith in the justice system. This means that this point is fully true for the round. For that reason, the impacts of our third contention, which are massive decreases in violent crime convictions because people are less likely to cooperate with the legal system, fully flows through. This point, when coupled with our very logical first contention, means that on their side, we're just simply going to have a lot more violent crime in Gov World, which is obviously horrible for the people living in these high crime areas, right? Again, this is objectively worse for people in these areas than, say financial crimes, Al Capone crimes are, because these crimes victimize them directly instead of, victimizing not situations, financial systems. Okay, on to our next point. They do not give warranting as to why the leaders of gangs are necessarily the root cause of gang activities rather than a culture of violence itself. We think that a gang leader can be replaced, meaning that they are not necessarily the root cause. My opponents essentially just assume that gang leaders are the root cause of these issues, but they don't give enough warranting for this to be true for the round. So judges, you should not believe them when they come up here and say in their third speech. Now, finally, our second contention about how, these, these hierarchical gangs simply don't really operate that much on financial crimes anymore proves that Gov is going out of their way to solve an issue that just doesn't exist. It essentially proves that they're going out of their way to apply a worse solution to an issue that doesn't exist, which is going to lead to horrible impacts for people living in these high crime areas. Okay, Onto a world versus world comparison. So, judges, GovSide completely misconstrues the effects of cutting off the head of the snake. And it's intuitive that going after people for financial crimes who are almost always protected by armies of lawyers to slow down this process is going to allow for more crime to happen. It's going to allow for more people living in fear of their own communities. It's going to lead to less cooperation with the police out of the fear of being murdered next. It takes 5 years to cut off the head of the snake, and it actually stops crime for a year, maybe, before someone inevitably comes up to take their place. Mass amounts of innocents have already died in the government world. In the government world, we can save, sorry, in the opposition world, we can actually save these families from being persecuted if they speak to the police. We can actually get intel on solving these crimes. We can destroy these networks from the bottom up. We think that on magnitude, we clearly win this round because we focus on the issues that actually plague people living in high crime communities, not just on financial systems which maybe exist in high crime communities. Once again, the op world prioritizes people that are currently dying from crimes, whereas the gov world prioritizes financial systems, meaning that they simply cannot win this round because we are looking for net benefits to people living in high crime areas. For all those reasons, I strongly, strongly urge an opposition ballot. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Um, 5 minutes, 30 seconds. I'll get some water actually. Okay. Three, two, one. There is at the top of case a couple of things I want to point out. First, is it true that there is no economic crime in the world as we see today? Absolutely not. Because the way that money laundering works is that gangs take in a huge amount of dirty money. That's what drug money is. Then they have fronts where they essentially purify the money. So saying that there is no money laundering or no tax fraud is just wrong. Gangs are synonymous with dirty money. Gangs don't exist without money laundering because saying that there is no dirty money is the same thing as saying that the drug rings and what the gangs are actually doing just don't exist. So when they come up and they tell you there's no economic crime, this is completely false. Now there's two questions. Who controls the pragmatic link into change, and which side controls the perceptual link? First, on the pragmatic impacts. They themselves concede in Amar's speech that there are power vacuums once the head of the snake is cut off. This means that the gang is less effective during a period of time where there is an actual vacuum. Quickly on their pragmatic impacts. They say violent crimes are going to decrease, and I'm just taking a stance. This is completely false because it's not the actual sentencing amount that actually people fear because they drop an analysis that the justice system works via a panopticon. It's not as if the gangs are analyzing the data and saying, oh, been a 10% decrease in people sentenced for drug arrests. No, they hear stories about people behind bars for their life. They hear stories about people who've lost their whole future. And that's how people are kept from actually committing crime in the first place. That's how the societal justice system exists. Because in both worlds, people have the conception that they could be caught, but probably won't. And this exists in op world as well, or else we would have no crime. Obviously, this is non-unique. But second, on the decrease of violent crime, there's something ridiculously important that Theo says in response, which goes dropped, which is what happens when people see nothing changing after they arrest sons, brothers, and daughters. People get angry because understand that people within the community who are committing crimes are family members. They attribute a faceless perspective to these gang members. They just say crime is committed, but they don't understand and they don't interact with the analysis that the people committing crimes are sons who are forced to join. They drop this analysis top of case, refer to it, that oftentimes people join for safety. They don't have another choice. So understand that the people who are committing these drug crimes and these violent crimes aren't the ones who are actually the ones that we should be blaming. It's those who are higher up. They say people will be happy to see the ones committing violent crimes go to jail, but we don't think this is the case when they see it being as a faceless person who goes to jail. To them, it's that the gang took their mother. To them, it's that the gang took their house. The lyrics in Eminem's song say kept getting shot up on the block in Mockingbird, and obviously this implies it's happening multiple times. You don't know exactly that it's Lil Timmy who's 17 years old who shot up you on the block. No, you understand that it's the gang itself. And so taking one person doesn't change anything if the violence continues. If they haven't proved that something changes in the status quo, then they can't win the round because perceptually people won't feel better. Why does nothing change? We tell you in PMC, which goes dropped. Resentment is bred when your brother is taken by the cops. More people are just found. Nothing changes. It's a veil of solvency that doesn't exist in op world because we tell you that the people committing these crimes are inherently replaceable. Nothing changes in opposition world. They're the status quo. If the status quo is broken, how can they come up here time and time again and tell you that they should be defending it? But now on the perceptual layer, they say people will just replace the snake, but I don't think they're interacting with what we're saying because their analysis is that perceptually people want you to go after the ones who have committed the crimes. And this would be the case if there was a clear link between going after crimes and crimes decreasing. But never in history has anything changed. We have the same amount of gangs, if not more today, than we've had 150 years ago. The only reason that the system is constructed like this is because it's too risky to change things. When we have the chance within a debate round to make change, we should. Now, why is change better necessarily? I try and ask Amar a POI 5 times and he doesn't respond. Here it was. Sorry. Will the people within the gang look to the Godfather, the one who is forcing them to commit crimes, the one who is forcing people to go behind bars? Will they see him as a good person? Obviously not. The people within the community will see the head of the gang as the one who is the cause behind their problems. They aren't going to see Lil Timmy, who's 12 years old and just dropped out of school, as the big issue within the community. And so necessarily, when you go after the higher ups, even if it isn't as successful, we think that it's necessarily going to seem as if it has a bigger impact. Because understand that the people who are within the gang who are committing the crimes, these are sons. Mothers will say this. They'll like, why did you just arrest someone who just sold some drugs? They drop the analysis that there is no other choice. You don't refuse it when the higher ups tell you go sell drugs. And so you have to accept a 10-year prison sentence that changes nothing. Their side, again, I can't say this enough, changes nothing. And so perceptually, when you seem as if you're going after the higher ups, this creates change at first, and then it's going to create pragmatic change later. For all these reasons, I'm so proud to propose.
All right, awesome. The judges will deliberate, and then the last judge to submit will announce decision. All right. Is everybody back? Okay, cool. I was the last judge to submit. The decision is a 2-1 for the government. Um, Capish was the squirrel, so if you'd like to go first.
Yes, I submitted my ballot for the opposition for Team uh, GJ, and I provided additional information in my summary. But essentially, what I felt like was is I felt that the arguments that were made, particularly like in the basic framework, were strong, and that also the opposition kind of stuck to it and kept coming back to those contentions on a pretty consistent basis. So I thought that their contentions that increasing violence as a result of, or potentially prosecutors focusing on financial crimes over financial or violent crimes would send a really bad message and potentially make overall violent crime worse. Things like robbery, assault, murder. I'm actually going to turn my camera on so you guys can see me. And I thought that that was something they consistently came back to and were able to expound on in later, I guess, people talking. And they kind of made it a moral imperative and pushed back to that as well from a prosecutor and societal perspective. I also thought that I bought the argument that these Al Capone type cases are not as possible in the modern world. Mafia organizations run from or can run effectively from cushy prisons and have access to communication within those prisons, and so it's a much different world. Um, and I thought that they also kind of rebutted properly the concept of the head of the snake, right? If you cut off the head of the snake, I guess that's kind of connection with the prison idea. I did think that government did well as well. And I, again, provided that additional commentary in my summary, but I just thought it was appropriate to choose the opposition side. However, congratulations to the government side.
All right,
Uh,
do you
oh,
want to go?
oh yeah, sure. I voted for the Gov. I think ultimately what came down for me was which side told me like if they better the status quo and how the other side worsens status quo. So I think what goes agreed upon is that the status quo is like bad right now, and that does. And then I think also it goes agreed that the ones committing the violent crimes are young people. And I think that doesn't go responded to by the op. So then that's why I like that claim that like there isn't money laundering or like there isn't financial crimes in the status quo. It's just a really big claim. I don't think it comes with enough warranting because I'm not gonna believe there's just no trafficking and no crimes of like money laundering. And then the gov does tell me that like it does happen and this does prereq because if you take down like the money from the crime groups, you're gonna see less of like the violent crimes because they don't have the funding. So I think ultimately I can vote there. But then also I think I come to the perception argument where the gov really does explicitly tell me that because you vote for them, because I vote for them that you're gonna see a better perception because the argument that like it's the young people committing the violent crimes is conceded that when you arrest them, no one's gonna really care, but they want to see like the older, higher up people that are actually the ones like doing the money laundering and the head of the bosses. You're gonna see an actual perception change. So I just think like the op doesn't really tell me why they're gonna be like fixing the status quo because it does go agreed the status quo is bad. So I just vote gov.
All right, cool. I I agree with a lot of what James said. I'm going to preface this with I think my RFDs have gotten slightly too tech for NYPDL. So just for reference, I have 4 years of East Coast experience. I do know a lot about East Coast debate. I've won NYPDLs. So just remember that when I give this RFD. Okay. I vote AF because I think they have the strongest internal link to preventing crime and violence. What this means is both sides are going for the same impact, so I evaluate the probability each side reaches these impacts, aka the strength of link. Furthermore, the opposition is defending the status quo that they concede is bad, meaning if Gov wins any improvement from the quo, they win. The reason AF is winning strength of link is because the power vacuum they expose at the very worst leads to a long period of time, Neg says something like a year, where there is no violent crime being done by a specific gang. This is just conceded, so this has 100% strength of link. it's just true in this round. Furthermore, the PMR extends a super damning framing claim that says that people only do violent crime by orders of leaders who will not get prosecuted because they're not doing violent crime. According to Gov's uncontested claims, they're sitting in an office counting drug money or something, and the only way they end up out of commission, unable to give orders, is if they're in jail for 5 years for like money laundering. I think AF is actually ahead on perception because I just think it's true that people have heard about 1 million teenagers who got caught up in gang activity and ended up in jail simply by virtue of the birth lottery in the neighborhood they live in. I think that it is true that taking out leadership is seen as a larger win for communities who live in fear of the orders these leaders give to these, a lot of the time, children. Furthermore, I think the AF is winning a massive prerequisite claim that isn't adequately dealt with in the block. The idea that you need money and administrative organization to have crime networks and gangs. The LOC kind of says no, gangs don't have leadership, which I think is untrue, and the block doesn't extend it or try to win it. So AF is winning, you lose access to critical capital needed to do gang violence, to like buy guns, drugs, etc. I think the AF has a bunch of claims that are strategic regarding the linearity of the net case. In the status quo, gang violence is cyclical and never ending because higher ups don't get prosecuted and lower members cycle in and out as they end up in and out of prison. This means even if the status quo is prosecuting more violent crimes directly, it is indirectly prosecuting less and enabling infinite cycles of violence. Because of this, it was an AF ballot. But great job to both teams.
You guys, bro, Amar, no, I'm so sorry you guys couldn't make it. I wish we had both been in finals. Thanks, judges. We'll see you guys
Yeah,
again in
thanks,
finals
everyone.
next time.
Great round.
It was a really good round.
Thank you.